Well, it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to our April Trainee Editorial Board gathering for the Radiology AI Journal. And our speaker today is Dr. Despina Kontos. Despina is Professor of Radiology and Associate Vice Chair of for Research for the department at the University of Pennsylvania, and is one of our esteemed deputy editors. And is, in addition to her expertise in machine learning, she has taken a leadership role in our department's research division, and has provided this discussion for a lot of the researchers there, and thought it would be something really valuable for this group as well. So Despina, the floor is yours, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well. Thank you for having me today. What we're planning to discuss a little bit with you today, and then I guess we can leave time for discussion. And if you want to ask me any questions, feel free to do so, either during the presentation or afterwards. A relatively short presentation, but touches on aspects that I found, in my life and my career. Sometimes are referred to as soft skills, but I actually found to be some of the hardest skills to develop, and some of the skills that one needs to continue to develop. Part of me doesn't like even the term work-life balance to begin with, because it assumes that work is this sort of enemy or negative thing against which you have to balance your all other aspects of your life, which I don't necessarily feel that way. I feel like work is part of my life, is an important part of who I am and my identity. And for me is more about balancing life in general, and trying to strike that balance as well in the environment of our work. I will talk especially about aspects of being an academic researcher, and what type of skills are needed to develop that balance in order to be happy both in the academic environment and I think in one's life as a whole. So we recognize that it's increasingly important, especially to the younger generations entering the field, that good life balance and quality of life is important, and it often trumps, compensation or other aspects that were traditionally thought of to be important sort of aspects of work and professional development. And increasingly, we see of institutions, not just in academia, but in private sector and so forth, trying to incorporate more aspects of wellness and life balance in order to attract and retain their workforce. So what do we mean when we talk about life balance or work-life balance? So as an academic researcher, I found that there are many roles that are part of what I do every day. And I have to give my attention to all these aspects. I want to give my attention to all these aspects in order to be a balanced individual. First and foremost for me is my family, and being a parent and a partner and a spouse. Then being a researcher, a teacher. I don't have clinical responsibilities, but I assume most of you do. And also aspects of self-care, spirituality, community engagement, that are also important to feel as a balanced and complete individual. And I have to say that, some of these roles get more or less emphasized during different phases of life. And certainly, especially self-care and engagement with the community sometimes, and spirituality, I've found in my life have taken a hit due to other responsibilities, and has been some of the more difficult aspects to balance. As an academic researcher, what are some of the main elements of my daily life? I sometimes joke with my trainees and say that at this point in my life, I think I'm better described by the term of being a professional grant writer, because that's pretty much all I do, on a regular basis, and what's always in my mind, thinking about research studies, thinking how to put them together, how to put together teams, how to obtain funding, how to implement them, and so forth. Publication and the quality of your research and your science is also very important. But also then comes the other aspect of managing a group of researchers and mentoring. And this is something that we often don't get any formal training for as an academic researcher. So to dive in a little bit more into that, in terms of the many roles of an academic researcher, first and foremost, I'm a scientist, we're scientists. So the quality of the science is very important and in many ways drives every other aspect of success. But it's not the only element that needs to be important in order to be able to be successful as an academic researcher and find a balance as an academic researcher as well. Being an academic researcher often involves teaching, even when not formally teaching in a classroom environment. There's still a lot of mentoring and a lot of research mentoring. I find myself often developing sort of marketing techniques. A grant proposal is basically marketing your science and asking for investors, so to speak. I often have to be a mini HR manager in terms of managing my research group, from like deciding compensation levels, visas, benefits, all that stuff. Sometimes I find myself being like a PR expert, public relations, when I collaborate with other groups, with other investigators. Sometimes you have to try to find lines, and those are skills that are developed over time. Being fiscally sort of aware and a fiscal manager as well, have to manage grant budgets, keep an eye on your spending. And when you have a lot of proposals, that gets also kind of a challenging. And then you have to become also a little bit of a mini lawyer when you get into managing IP rights, patents, etc. So there's a lot to learn and a lot to balance at the same time. And as I said, most of us really get formal science training in the science part of it. We don't necessarily get formal trainings in a lot of the other aspects. And those are skills that we often have to develop on the job and refine in the lifetime of our career. So what's important, I think, in this process is to first and foremost define what is life balance for you. And that is different for every individual. And even for the same individual, it varies over time. It changes continuously in the trajectory of life. And that's okay. Not only that's okay, I think that's the nature of the beast, right? So life balance is a very individual thing. What makes one person feel balanced may not make the other person feel balanced. Some people do best when they compartmentalize things. When I'm at work, I do work. When I'm at home, I do home. I don't answer emails. I don't do phone calls. Other people feel more balanced if they can blur those boundaries a little bit. When I'm at work, maybe I'll take an hour and do my yoga in my office. And then when I go home, maybe I'll work for an hour at night. And that flexibility is good for me and helps me find that balance. So I think first and foremost, it's important to do that soul searching and define what is life balance for you. And set your priorities in terms of family, yourself, your work, your community. How do those things rank up? And during different parts of life, how did those priorities alternate? And I think that's an important process that is different for everyone. And it's okay. And in fact, it's appropriate to be that way. Once you have your own sort of life priorities straightened out, it's important to also set your own academic priorities. Because we're academic researchers, again, it's not a one-size-fits-all career, a one-size-fits-all path, or a one-size-fits-all job. So what type of academic researcher do you want to be? And especially for most of you who have clinical responsibilities as well, how do you see those two elements, working together? How much of your career do you want to be focusing on research? And also, do you want to be the researcher who writes big grants as a PI all the time? Do you want to be more of a collaborative researcher? Do you want to have a narrow area of focus? Do you want to have a broader area of focus, and so forth? And keeping in mind that quantity does not always mean quality. So having more papers doesn't always necessarily mean that you're making a bigger impact on your field. Having more grants doesn't always mean that, that again, you're making more of an impact in your field. And how do you assess success for your own trajectory? That's something that I think, but yes, there are some objective measures, but I think it's also very sort of personal. And how do you define being successful? In that process, it's also important, I think, to align with institutional priorities, and priorities also criteria for promotion at your academic institution. So if your priorities in some way do not align with the priorities of your institution and the priorities that the institution sets up for you on track, I think that's something to seriously consider as well. Either you need to realign your priorities, but most often is you need to realign the institution. And if you're confident about your priorities, then you need to find an institution that support those priorities and a type of positioning role that will support those priorities as well. And then it's equally important, once you have figured that stuff out and you know what you're looking for and what is important to you, obviously to stay focused, work hard, and repeat the cycle as the little comic shows down there. In order to do that, I think it's important to learn how to prioritize. So there's only 24 hours in a day, and I think it's very important to be able to sleep a bunch of those hours, at least 7 hours, to maintain a good health. And if you have family and children, there are other things you want to do as well, and they're important for your life balance. So it's important to prioritize, be efficient in what you do, and a big, very important thing, learn to delegate. And that becomes even more important as you sort of rise up in your career and your professional advancement, that to realize that not every little thing has to go through you. And build yourself, build your environment and your team in a way that you can trust to delegate things and really focus on the things that are priorities for you and become more and more efficient. Equally important is also to have a realistic plan in terms of what you want to do and set realistic expectations. If your expectation for the day or for the year are completely unrealistic, then it's very likely that you will grow to be frustrated. But in some way, you're setting yourself up for not being successful because your expectations from the beginning were not realistic. And it's also important to learn how to say no sometimes in different sort of commitments or opportunities that may come up that may seem attractive, but at the same time may not be part of what you should be prioritizing and being efficient. And also being very important is to find good mentors. And mentors are super important, especially in the junior phases of one's careers, but I think they're super important through the entire lifetime of one's career. So at any point in your trajectory, you're a mentor and you're also a mentee, because there's always somebody behind you coming up from where you were a step before that you can mentor, but there's always someone who can mentor you for your next steps. And it's very important to find people that you can look up to, that inspire you, that you can trust, but most importantly, people who care about you also as a person, not necessarily just for your career development and sort of the more quantifiable sort of objective aspects of your productivity, so to speak. So it's important to find good mentors for science, for career, and also for life. And there are several sort of places you can find those, not just in your academic environment, in your community or your spiritual sort of religious practice, if you have one, and many paths to do so. And so I will sum up by saying that I think what is important for having a productive academic and research sort of trajectory while being balanced as an individual is to find the right balance that is important for your life. Try to make incremental changes when you decide that you need to make changes. Be realistic about those changes and find appropriate support for them. Find time to recharge. That is super important. And sometimes doing less is actually more, and taking the time to have a break and spend time with with people that you care about. And in other words, and this is something that one of my yoga teachers used to say a lot, and I often go back to that line very often. I think it's important to make your own happiness a priority. And when I say your own happiness, I don't mean, like a happy-go-lucky, walking on cloud nine kind of vision of happiness, but trying to figure out what makes you a content individual and making that a priority. And once you figure that out and you make that a priority in everything you do in your life, everything else will fall into place. And that's not to say, oh, that makes me happy, I don't give a crap about anybody else. It's, I think, you'll often find that, being content also involves happiness of other people, especially people that you care about. And so once you find out what your own happiness looks like and really consciously decide to prioritize that, it's much easier, I think, for everything else to fall into place in all aspects of life, including your academic and professional trajectory. And so with that, I think I would like to end with thinking about it as a life balance versus like a work-life balance, and trying to go with that as a motivation and finding balance even at work. So I'm happy to stop now and happy to have a discussion.
Thanks, Despina. That was terrific. Are there any questions? Any comments?
Yes, go ahead.
Hey, Despina, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Yeah, thank you so much for your talk today. I wanted to, you and I had spoken a little bit about this before, but I feel like I'm getting a better feel for it now, coming off of fellowship interviews and getting a feel for being a radiologist that's trying to be a physician scientist to make enough impact in the field, but at the same time, as the main priority or conversation has been how much can you clear on a list, which is obviously super important, right? I mean, that's what pays the bills. But just kind of what my question is, in your experience, what has been the role of the few physician scientists, radiologists out there that works in conjunctions with people such as yourself that do the majority of the science and push the field forward? For those of us who want to be involved in that, how can radiologists by training be more involved in that and have that sort of role? I know that you said it's kind of defined as we go and not a one size fits all, but I'm just trying to figure out where I fit in, and it may not be anywhere, but
I think, again, it's up to you to decide, where you want to fit in, because, there are, fully, MD trained radiologists who are the ones who do all the science, right? Who have labs, who write the R1s, who, and it can go all the way from being sort of a partner, with someone who's more of a basic scientist and bringing in the clinical expertise and writing grants together as multiple PIs and so forth. You can be a sort of a co-investigator, which is, being more kind of like the buddy who brings in the clinical expertise and domain problem, so to speak, to all the way someone who's just like providing very basic sort of, information, let's say, for the context of their study. So I think there's a whole spectrum, as it is for a basic scientist, to which extent, do you go all in, or you're more, collaborative, versus you can be a scientist and be a PI in a lab that has 20, 30 people. You can be a staff scientist. You can be, an analyst. You can be a collaborative faculty. There's all kinds of different ways. So Mike, I would turn that question to you and say, where do you see yourself fitting in? And I think always, to me, and always a good compass in that is to go by what makes you more excited. Yeah. Not by going by what are limitations. Oh, I'm more excited to do this, but that would mean I would have to do that, and then that would mean I have to do that, and I don't know if I can do that, so maybe I don't want to do that, so I'll just go with plan B. So I would say the compass should be, that happiness we were talking about, right? That what gets you excited to get out of bed in the morning on Monday and start your day being equally excited as the fabulous weekend you just had. That should be the thing that you should do.
Yeah, and I feel like I know that answer. I just feel like it's not a very popular answer, I guess, is more kind of where I'm going, which, I mean, that's every environment, institution has its own deal. But yeah, to be heavily involved in the science is is something that I've always kind of espoused. I write my own code, I come up with my own things. And now granted, I'm a trainee, so things change until I get involved with teams and labs and, you know, wherever I end up for fellowship. But yeah, so thank you for that. I appreciate that. It kind of reinstitutes the fact that I am going to be happiest when I'm pushing the boundary and limits and making people kind of, you know, raise their hands a lot and ask a lot of questions, because what I'm submitting is, you know, really kind of, it really questions the field. And so that's what I want to do. And so thank you. Thank you for
go with it. You know, I think especially, you have more flexibility to adapt if need be now than later, right? So if you know what makes you happy now, this is the time to go, you know, full blown, like fight for it as much as you can, and try to set up your career in a way that you can do that. So let's say if you're negotiating positions, you know, this is the time, you know, or whatever lies ahead of you, think of that path with that in mind, you know, and try to, and sometimes it may take longer to build a foundation, but, you know, this is a time to build that foundation that would allow you to do what you want for the rest of your life. So it's an important foundation. There's no reason to rush it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Of course, happy to talk at any point.
And you know,
thanks for this. Go
ahead,
sorry.
Ram. No, please.
Thanks for the amazing talk. I think this is something that is I really needed. You talked about mentors. I wanted to ask, like, what are the considerations that you think one like me, a trainee like me, has to do before choosing mentors? And do you think like life mentors and career mentors should be like separated, or you think finding one mentor for all of them would be like the better option?
Depends. To be honest, a good mentor is a good mentor, you know. But the mentors have been the best for my career are also the best for my life advice. And for us, I think career and life are, for me at least, is very one part of each other. Like there's no like career and then my life. Like what I do is part of who I am. So it's part of my life. It's not like a different thing from my life. And so I think, again, the most important, when do you know that you have a good mentor? I think in my experience, is a mentor that you trust. They will give you their advice with your best interest in mind, no matter what. Even if their interest is at stake, they will still advise you based on what is best for you. That's tough. That requires gut, you know, to be a mentor like that. But those are the best mentors. And I feel very blessed to have had some of those in my church, actually.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you.
I just wanted to say, you may have different mentors at different
Yes.
periods of I had two great mentors as an undergrad. One was the professor who was the head of the medical genetics lab, and the other was a postdoc. And, you know, they both helped me develop in my abilities and were, you know, looked out for me and gave me opportunities at that time. And I learned a lot from them. And, you know, you may find a whole bunch of different mentors. It's, you know, it's like, you want to build Team Baram, you know, I mean, you're going to have different, you know, somebody who might be your help you, you know, writing coach, someone who might help guide you on where to apply for grants, somebody who might suggest job opportunities. You know, there are lots of different roles that mentors can play, including the ones, you know, I think Despina's right, you know, the ones who say, you know, you really need to work less, spend more time with your family. You know, I mean, it's sort of, sometimes that's what you need to hear. And having people who can focus on that and guide you in those things is really important.
Yeah, that's completely true. Yeah, thanks.
I can add to that just a little bit real quickly. Sorry, and then sorry, Ali, I saw you jump in there. That's my bad. During fellowships and I'm interviews and I'm talking to people from different institutions about their experience, former fellows, there were those that were like, oh no, you need to do this. And this is where you need to go because this is what the market's doing and things like that. And then I explained how weird I am and how many different things I'm doing and the ideas I have. And they go, oh, no, that's not going to fit at all for you. So for you, you need to do this. No, that makes much more sense because that's what you want to do because you'd be happier and you know what's best for you. And so it took sometimes, even if that person didn't start with that sort of advice, when you start to tell your story and kind of what that is, and obviously it's still building, I felt that that's when that character really came out, was like, oh no, oh, I didn't know that's how you rolled. You need to do like this. So I don't know if that helps or not at all, Varun. So anyway, sorry, Ellie, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks.
Not at all. Despina, thank you so much for that talk and reminder. I think it's easy to forget. And one thing that reminds me of is, especially as I talk to junior attendings, new faculty, and for advice, right? Oftentimes it seems that work that they want to do for research or other extracurricular involvement, whether it be for editorial boards or other organizations, sometimes it spills over into time that's been carved out for personal life because of increasing clinical demands, increasing volumes, just being pulled from academic time or not being allotted enough academic time. Going forward and being aware of that, what are some approaches that you recommend when either looking for jobs or negotiating for jobs, to have a very clear expectation with your employer that I want a few days during the week to participate in research and editorial boards and organizations like RSNA or others?
So two things. First of all, try to negotiate it as part of your protected time and put it in writing, and whatever you sign, that it's there, that you have the protected time that accounts for your those activities, and make sure it's spelled out and written down and not just as a verbal promise, and lock it in terms of like for how long that's protected, right? But the other thing I'll tell you, that always happens, no matter how much protected times we have and whatnot, that threat is always there. And ultimately, you are the person who will make the decision to guard your own time. Nobody else will do this for you. And there will always be more things that fall on your lap. So that's one thing you have to decide. What I found is that in general, I have some, and that took me a while. I might say it now easily, but that was not always the case. It took a while, and it took some kind of like tough conversations with myself and real sort of energy to do it without feeling guilty or feeling that I wasn't doing as much as I could be doing. And because we're, let's face it, we're all overachievers. We wouldn't be doing what we're doing if we weren't. And there's always that little voice in our head that says we could be doing no more than we're doing. And that voice will, it's hard to shut it up, so to speak. And so you're ultimately the one responsible to protect your time, period, right? And decide how you want to do that. I'm not advocating that necessarily that a very rigid approach is the best one. There may be some times that you'll have to say, you know what, tonight I have to do a little work. But then there may be some other times that you'll say, you know what, this morning I'm not going to do some work. I'm going to go with my kid and do this. If you're going to do flexibility on one end, do it on the other end. But I think it's good to, and I do that a lot. It's good to have some general boundaries. Like my general boundaries is usually I don't work at night at home. Like after we have dinner, that's it. I may do an email or two if I'm sitting on the sofa from my phone and whatever, but it'll have to be something that really needs that's really urgent and it needs to get done to get me to sit down. And that doesn't happen often. And usually right now, I try not to work if there's no something urgent most of my weekend. Definitely have one day that I don't do anything work related. But now it's more like having both, because I want to spend time with kids and do other stuff. So how do you compensate the fact that as you grow into your career, you get more responsibility? Here's my golden advice to you. Be efficient. Don't mess around, when you're doing something, and learn to delegate. That is, so a thing that 5 years ago took me 2 hours to do, now may take me 20 minutes. Like you have to build those skills, right? So in the same amount of time, you pack more things. That's the only way to do it, you know? And so developing those and skills to do that is important. Keeping in mind that perfect is the enemy of the good enough, right? Some things just have to be good enough. And guess what? Some things do not get done. That's how it is, you know? That's just life. And then you have to prioritize what things are the most important to get done versus the least important. And for me, an important factor of this is, am I the only person who could be doing this? Does it absolutely have to go through me? And how time sensitive is this, right? And so there'll be times during the week that I will have allocated in my calendar. So if I don't deal with something, I leave it as an unread email in my calendar, in my mailbox. So if I see them building like really in the hundreds, it's like, okay. So I have time building up in my schedule every week to just sit down and deal with all those things that may not have been as time sensitive, but they need to get done. But then there will be other things that I need to deal with more efficient, more immediately. So I think being more efficient, most efficient is the best thing. Like if you're submitting an abstract, let's say, right? As a trainee, like an RCMA abstract may be a big deal. You may be working on it for several days, and that's all fine and great. I'm not going to spend more half an hour in an abstract. Half an hour, good case, like that's it. Because if I spend all my time for my abstract, when am I going to write the paper? Right? For me, that's more important, and that's what I need to prioritize. And if I spend all my time doing that, when am I going to write the grants? That's another thing that is even more priority, because in the lab hierarchy, you know, my trainees can write the abstract, you know, others can write the papers, I can take a look at them, but none of the other folks is going to bring the R01, who's going to pay everybody's salaries at the end of the day. So I'm responsible for doing that. So if I have a pyramid there, you know, so that's kind of how I found, you know, a way to make the meetings shorter, make the meetings more efficient, cancel some meetings if you have to, you know, and try to, but for me, that's why I found the way to do it. Just being more efficient and prioritizing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. If you have any advice on tools or apps that you use to help to help with the efficiency or for organization and planning,
I try to use some tools.
Would love to hear those.
Sometimes the tools and the apps take more time than actually doing it. So at this point, I'm like, you know what? I'm not doing anything. I'm just leaving the emails unread. That's it. That's as far as an organizational tool and app would go. But if my advice there is, if the tool or app takes you more time than actually doing the thing and getting over with it, then it's like, you know, because you can get into a whole thing there, like trying to optimize everything. And having some flexibility is also a good thing, I think, not being super rigid about things. Because life comes at you in all kinds of different ways, right? You have to have some flexibility. And knowing that flexibility goes both ways, not just one way.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Question, Despina, thanks so much for that talk.
Of course.
A comment that I think is implied in what you said, but I don't know if it was explicitly, is, or maybe you did say it and I missed it, was choosing which items to say yes to. Because as you say, that list got really long and some just don't get done. I'm just curious, how do you go through that list? I find that's one of the most challenging things, is saying yes to everything means that you end up with too much on the plate. Return
on investment. You know, what is the what is the impact? Not necessarily a self-serving return on the investment. What is the impact, the outcome of your time? So if you have 3 things and you only have half an hour, out of those 3 things, which one will have more of a positive impact in whatever it is you're trying to do than the others, right? Again, if I have the grant, the abstract, and the paper, different things you can take in mind. Where's the abstract due? If it's today, and if it's an important thing, then maybe give priority to that. If the grant is due 2 weeks later and the paper, you know. But if they're both due, my grant is today and the abstract is today, whatever about the abstract, I don't care about it. I'm going to focus on the grant, right? So you have to somehow find a way to measure the return of your investment, of your time investment.
Thank you.
Well, Despina, I wanted to thank you so much for really a terrific presentation, and very thought-provoking, and I think encouraging too for a lot of folks at the kind of the early and often very challenging stage of their careers, where I think school is easy because they give you an assignment and tell you what to do. Your broader assignment in life is more challenging because you're the one who has to really write the lesson plan, if you will, and write the curriculum and figure out what it is you want to do. And I thought, to John's question, sometimes the road less traveled by is not necessarily a bad path to take. You can find a lot of really interesting things to do, in that, and finding your own path. And it can create a very, I will say, for those of you who are looking to go on into a life in academics, can create a really very engaging and satisfying career.
Absolutely.
It's not that it ain't work, but it can be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And I also want to leave everybody with a very positive note on this. I want to assure all of you that it's absolutely 100% doable, 100%, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise, that you can be very successful in what you do and be a happy and content individual. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise or try to convince you that the only way to be successful is by burning yourself out and being miserable. That I am here to tell you it's 100% possible. But to do that, you have to take a leap of faith. And the faith you have to put is in your own self. You have to. You absolutely have to. But I assure you and guarantee to you that it's 100% doable. 100% doable. And you can figure it out.